Well, Bob, Brian, thanks for doing this. So here's the context, guys. A couple of weeks ago, I was on the train to the city, and I read an article by Brian. And this is something we've discussed a long time ago, for many years. This concept of if you ask marketers, do you want transparency or do you want performance? And my attitude and Brian's is they choose performance every time. And this can be proven out in the numbers because we see Advantage Plus, we see Max, we see proprietary trade. We see a lot of movement and growth in sort of non-transparent media for performance reasons. So I said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy and paste this. I'm going to send it to Bob. And I literally in 1 minute, I said, Bob, what do you think about this? Oh, Brian's always bringing this up. And I said, you know what we should do? We should talk about this in Cannes. And so then he said, find a venue. Yeah. You said find a venue. And then so Bill and Aaron and the team here hooked it up. So here we are. So I want to start with this. You provide the context of this thinking around, if you have the choice, transparency or performance, right? Yep. And start with that, and then we'll take it over to this side here, and we'll just...
Yeah, I mean, let me start by observing, per David Ogilvy, that people rarely do what they say what they think, or think what they feel. When it comes to the world of spending money on advertising, they more often than not say that of course they want transparency, they want partnerships.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, who doesn't? Sounds great. And what they feel is, oh my God, I've got pressure from above, and I just need to satisfy a goal one way or another, however is necessary. And what we observe, again, let's clarify, this is not what should happen, and it's certainly not necessarily universal. But we generally observe that marketers prioritize certainly performance, price, perceived price, over things like control or transparency. And convenience is another factor that matters.
Perceived is the key word, though, right?
Perceived is critical.
That's the key word.
And that perception can be completely wrong. And so when we try to understand how certainly media money in particular has moved through the agency world, it is a major factor around many of the disruptions. Not the only factor, but many of the larger account changes, specifically in the United States, where you saw WPP via Group M at the time, and IPG via Media Brands at the time, losing a lot of share to Publicis and to Omnicom. And let's separate when you guys were winning for different reasons. But I think that a large chunk of the global brands had deterministic factors which were based on pricing or perceived pricing and perceived performance or credible claims of performance. Media owners, similarly, could benefit from marketers' budget allocations, primarily because they could claim performance and the marketer would accept the claim because it satisfied a lot of other goals. And so...
which have nothing to do with media in many cases.
No.
Right?
Anyways, and so we just note this. We're not moralizing on it. We're saying...
We're observing.
That's all. We're analysts.
Now, you said something important there, and I want to translate this back over, which is... In economics, there's two broad schools of economics. There's normative economics and positive economics. Positive economics are the way things actually are. Normative economics are the way things should be or the way we'd like them to be. So that's kind of where we're at here in this discussion. What I sent you in the email on the train was, I get transparency, yes or no. I get performance, yes or no. That creates a 2x2. There's 4-box framework there. And
which I love 2x2s.
Yeah, everyone loves 2x2s. Paparo we love these, right? They're great because they're very useful when you can design one and think of one because it explains the world and helps observe things, right? Or explain observations. So you want to go toward a world, and you're taking the world that way, right? Because you're on stage a lot, Bob, and your home-based message is transparency.
Yeah, no. Look, I think there's two things that have just happened in the last 6 months. Even let's call it the last year, because the tools are much more powerful than they used to be. A marketer now has insight into things that they didn't have before. So although they were choosing performance, they had no choice because they could never get signals and they couldn't see into the data and really understand whether the performance is happening or not. So the reality is the holding companies built these big engines that were not transparent to them, and they were just happy because they got performance. The Metas, I could write a check to Zuckerberg, he would get me performance, but now I have an alternative. I have these AI engines that give me a source of truth about not only the performance, but how I got to the performance, and insight onto my consumers. So now we're at the point where, as a marketer, I can make a decision where I couldn't just do that 6 months ago.
Correct.
So that's why I'm saying transparency is just as important now as you evaluating performance.
So you're saying we do get to a world where the marketer can be of the 4 boxes. I get transparency and I get performance.
Because I think just blindly believing performance without knowing the levers that were pulled, you're being a lazy marketer and you don't understand your consumer.
And you're probably being taken advantage of.
And if I'm at a holding company right now, I'm forced to use their data segment, okay, which is cohort group data segment. I'm forced to use their principal buying, which I have no idea how much money they're making.
Contractually, it's often written in there too, right? I mean,
totally.
yeah.
You have no other way of doing it. And therefore, as a marketer in a big brand, you're like, okay, they're driving performance for me. I don't really care.
Yeah.
But now if I can have insight into, oh my God, they're taking 30% of my working media and they're holding it as an agency profit,
right.
I'm going to actually challenge that now, which before I couldn't do that.
Back up here.
But the distinction between being lazy and politically expedient is sometimes blurry. And what I mean by that is the marketer, well, and it's the same thing I observed, like when I showed up in agency land in 2003, knowing nothing about the business, I would consistently hear something is irrational. Something is irrational, or someone's lazy, or whatever. And then it's like, okay, interesting. And I spent most of my time over the next, 8 years at IPG trying to understand, why do actually people make decisions? Actually understanding people actually are rational. They're mostly making rational decisions for reasons we typically don't understand or fully appreciate. And so in that context, we would see that, while this political pressure is significant, it's causing them to make this choice. Remember, in life as in business, we make bad decisions often when they're better than worse alternatives. That is critical. And so to point, it's not that these are the best possible decisions, but maybe that set of decisions, given a lot of other factors, wasn't real.
Would you make a better decision if you understood the levers that were being pulled?
It depends. That's my observation. It depends, because in isolation.
All right, so let's take off the lazy marketer.
Yeah.
If you're a good marketer, you're going to blindly believe that the performance you're getting off a black box works, or would you rather understand the levers are being pulled, how the models are done, how the audiences are built, so that when the performance comes back, I know what's actually happening in the world?
And Bob, I'll give you a great example.
Yeah.
So there's a company called Waste Not. This guy, John Joe Smith, is the founder. He's ex-M Particle, built this lightweight CDP to do, because it bugged him, audience suppression on Meta.
Yeah, perfect.
Meta does not want you to do audience suppression. And
not.
Trade Desk doesn't want you to do it either, frankly. A lot of people, Snap, you name it. Builds this product, makes it easy to do audience suppression, which is a form of transparency once you do it. Performance off the charts. And he's got like a lot of big D2C, $100, $200 million D2C, challenger brands. And they love it because they're spending 30-40% of their revenue on marketing, on performance marketing
And
mainly.
by the way, now I'm actually using working media more effectively. I mean, so your number when you look at working media versus non-working media, you're not even looking at those double the suppressed markets, like of the audiences, right? That's a refinement. So even in the numbers that you are tracking over time, you and Luke, that because these tools are going to be much more transparent, the definition of working media is going to change now from where it was.
Yeah.
And sorry.
Well, I was going to say that's possible. And also, let's separate the most desirable clients for some agencies, yours perhaps, may actually be able to overcome some of these issues. I'm just trying to observe the broader subset of the industry.
I appreciate that.
And so one thing I observe is that, and again, when we're trying to anticipate where the industry is going, which is really what we're trying to do, and again, you can navigate in and around that given where the industry goes. What I think of is the pressure that a marketer faces when they say, oh wait, I'm going to be judged internally based on a perceived price. I mean, I saw this ridiculousness of the superficiality of price negotiations in
You're
television.
talking about a weighted average CPM across all
Oh
media.
yeah, as a perfect example. It's like, I just need to show that I got a weighted average CPM that came down. Quality had no bearing on that
Not at
choice.
all.
That is precisely the 15, 20 years of programmatic.
Yep.
I remember in 2010, GM would be spending 1% of their entire media budget on programmatic, and procurement, there was like a holy trinity. Procurement says, wait a minute, we want to bring down our weighted average CPM across all media buys from 20 to 19, 5% change or 10% change. So what do? You allocate more budget over the years from say 210 all the way really through 218 when you kind of maxed out to 15-20% going to programmatic banner ads for $1. Well, what did you end up doing? You artificially brought down your weighted average. CFO's happy, except you did not do anything. You didn't.
No.
And you had Martin Sorrell here in 2016 saying P&G's got a volume problem, and they still have a volume problem. They fixed it with prices over the last 4 years, but they still have a volume problem. So does auto.
At the decision maker level, the budget setter and all the influencers around them internally, they make bad decisions because there are worse alternatives, i.e. getting fired, not getting promoted, right? And that is the driver of so much of this.
That's the piece. I agree with that.
Right?
I agree. Yeah.
But that creates opportunity too.
Yeah.
Because then when you have a marketer, and I would always say this to like clients when I would say this at WPP or at Interpublic, like just because I'm saying that the average marketer will make dumb decisions or make decisions that look to the outside world dumb and are bad for your business, doesn't mean you have to do it too. Right. But I know 90% of you will, dear clients.
Yeah.
So where are we? Where are we going to go?
Look, I think it is a reckoning in the industry right now. I think marketers are going to take back the dollar and have a better fiduciary responsibility on behalf of their CFOs. And I actually believe, and their stockholders, I think finally for once, CMOs and CFOs will be friends, because I'm not going to be measured by marketing qualified leads. I'm going to be measured by how many cars I sell. And I believe that with a performance-based model that agencies will come out with, we are now at one of our clients, we're tied to EPS. First time ever. Our compensation is tied to EPS. That fundamentally changes my entire team and what we do there.
I got to say something. So I still remember, again, one of my first big revelations in agency land. So I went to IPT from Deutsche Bank, right? And we sat next to the autos analysts. And so I remember being asked, I knew nothing but advertising, and it was asked like, have a view on the category of autos. What's going to happen to advertising? Brian, call your Wall Street people. They must know what's going on. And I called these guys. I said, yeah, I need to come up with like an understanding of the auto advertising sector, because like it's our most important category for the industry. We had GM even at the time. I said, yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's only a couple $1 billion. We don't really think about it at all. And like, and you know that at the CFO level, and this is the problem, they didn't either. Not in a meaningful way. Yeah, and I think that this is part of the problem, that advertising is, notwithstanding this room, too unimportant to the vast majority of marketers. It is about 1% of total spent for the average marketer. Now, some categories that number pushes 5, maybe 10. Some brands,
but on average, from a GDP perspective, it's about 1.2% of global GDP.
But this is the point, that it's so unimportant that other factors dominate. Now, again, this is also what creates opportunities for marketers, because the market that realizes they can drive growth through these things, through transparency, through better performance, all those things, great. And that's only going to be 10% of the companies. It's not going to be the vast majority.
Yeah, I think...
You can have all the 10%, by the way.
No, I know. I think the traditional way of marketing and advertising is just fundamentally changing in the world right now.
Yeah.
I think the consumers already moved on, right? They're making decisions, they're discovering products in different ways than they ever have before. And marketing hasn't caught up yet. You still have traditional marketers still talking about funnels. You still have analysts still looking at the industry in very siloed ways, money shifting here to here to here to here, when reality is that the consumer is making decisions differently. Yeah. So that means you have to show up in a very different way as a partner to the company. I won't even say the marketer anymore, to the company that you're helping them drive their business. And the only way you can actually start to really help them is to get underneath how the levers that they're pulling to do marketing and business planning has changed fundamentally.
I got a question for you on this, Bob.
Yeah.
I mean, do you see a different, you have some of the world's biggest marketers as clients, but because you are more US skewed and just some of the heritage, I think that you would get fewer of the global accounts. Do you have any observations based on what you've seen with the largest brands who have global accounts and global assignments from your older or prior roles, and what you see now? Is there a difference by segment of marketer where they're receptive to what you're saying versus what I'm saying?
I actually think the global marketer is more frustrated than the US-based marketer.
Okay, interesting.
Because a global marketer has such opaqueness into what's happening in those local markets. And the way that the agency models have been set up is they're country-based models. So therefore, if I want to know what's going on in Spain, I've got to go through the holding company into the general manager that's running Spain to figure out what's going on in Spain.
This is part of the problem, though.
This is something you talk about all the time,
So, but the reality is, if we have the tools and everyone's on a common platform and everything rolls up, you do global planning, you do global measurement, which we have now Blue converged, we can then start to see the signals, and the global marketer has a better informed view of what the hell's happening. When you standardize on platforms, it doesn't matter what the hell the organization looks like. So as we go out and we put our platforms in place, you then have one truth. You have one glass that you're looking at. You have the signals that are happening. You understand market share. You understand where your
That's a
competitors
scary
are doing.
proposition for a lot of people.
And then therefore it's transparent to the CFO and the CEO and the CMO. Everyone sits down and we say, okay, this is how we're going to move dollars around. It's a whole new world. It is just a fundamental paradigm shift for how we're actually going to do marketing. And honestly, for once, marketing and sales and the CFO will coordinate together to make it happen. One common platform gets this organization to all cooperate, even though someone else owns the inventory, someone else owns the media, and someone else owns promotions. I now have one glass that I can actually look at the different
But I make the point
signals.
that
That's transparency.
but as a company
Versus I'm spending media with publicists, and they're doing principle-based buying for me, and I think I'm doing great on media and have a really high ROAS, but I have no damn inventory.
GM or at any of these companies where it's 1% of revenue or less, they're not optimizing their organization around this. This is a secondary, tertiary, quaternary thing versus Shark Ninja, as an example, where it's like, no, this is the top of mind thing at the top of the company.
It's much more important, but I do think, look, I think it's a lot of money to be spending at General Motors.
Yeah.
And yes, it's a small percentage, but it does influence sales. So, I mean, you talk to Norm DeGrav, he was influencing sales by taking it from just brand marketing to lower funnel marketing, and he really drove the share in Cadillac specifically.
So your comment on publicists, right?
Yeah.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. I mean, they're doing incredibly well financially. I mean, it's just a cash flow machine. They're crushing it. But
It's against my argument.
No, but
but that's my point.
But
you can both be right. Both can grow and you can grow.
There's a lot of share.
Yeah.
I mean, people want to
You
have
can both be
opaqueness, and the marketers can go and use.
You can have Shark Ninja.
Yeah,
Publicists can have GM.
100%.
Yeah, but what you said that was interesting because it reminded me of, like often in this industry, the scene from Wolf of Wall Street when McConaughey's having lunch and he's like, no, you don't let him sell. That would make it real, right? You get another idea, right? Another concept, another stock, and meanwhile, we're making fees, right?
Yes, exactly.
This to me has been a lot. There's been a lot of that going on. And I just wonder if that is a model going forward. And the reason why I asked that, because if you're right, then a lot of things are going to go really wrong for Omnicom, IPG, Publicis, and WPP.
Yeah, I think scale is one factor. I think as you start to peel back the onion and you understand where your money's really going, I think they're going to start to have more and more problems.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to start exposing that. And it's not that I have to expose it. It's going to get exposed. Like, it's going to be that clients are going to be able to get online and they're going to be able to see things that they normally couldn't see before.
We also need to be mindful of the fact, though, that again, if something happens to say an Omnicom, let alone a WPP Publicis, so many other factors are going to be at play. In Omnicom in particular, is so focused on margin. They're so focused on factors other than investing in the business in a way. Sure, but the point is
driving their clients' business.
But their orientation is going to be so different, and WPP's got a different set of challenges, and Denso has a different set of challenges. At the end of the day, the agency industry is approximately 20% return on equity business. It will grow further. Maybe it should be lower than that. That's a really strong number, by the way, if there's not, think about it.
On a return on invested capital, we do things a little differently. I mean, Publicis is at 52%. Meta's at 48%, and that's really, really good.
But these are big numbers. The point is they're making too much, you could argue, and it's not about the principle-based trading. It's more about they should be investing more capital into the long-term growth of the business, because otherwise people, say yourselves, or other mid-sized independents in particular, are going to take share, because that's where we're seeing capital going into the industry. And it has nothing to do with the transparency thing. That may also occur. You could have Publicis doing well with non-transparency and Omnicom doing less well with non-transparency.
But yeah, you have Horizon doing well, PMG is doing really well, Butler Till's doing really well.
A lot of the independents are doing well, but I mean, part of what we're doing, look, I don't have the money to invest like they can on platforms for the future. So the way that we're navigating here is to double down with a Google, double down with an Amazon, use all the money that they're investing in their tools and point them towards marketing, which they're more than happy to help me with. So therefore, I'm bringing the best of breed, most innovative tools to clients, which is also another angle that the holdcos have not done that strategy, right? By buying LiveRamp, by buying the things that they've bought, their vested interest is to get a return on that dollar. And I've been that before, right? When holdcos buy companies, you're going to your clients and you're saying you have to use that technology. That may not be the right technology for you and that client.
But there might be a client who says, actually, thank you for making my job simpler.
Easier.
And there's a segment of the market
That's what I would say. Lazy. Yes.
because they've got other things to do.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, But on that point, I remember being with a very large CPG when in consulting days, and someone sitting me down and telling me, "Tom, you don't understand. Okay, we spend 85% of our time with creative. We don't want to spend time with media. They don't want to. They were. This was a big. They owned a lot of wine brands. Like we're in the vineyard. We're in the production facility. We're with labeling. And then that's with the creative shop, right? And they're like, the other. That's why we have a media agency. And no eye on the ball whatsoever, right? I mean but I wonder, is that still true?
This is the other trend that's happening right now. You know, we broke apart media and creative out of convenience for our clients. Like it was economically better for media companies to go and buy at scale, right? Put a lot of pressure on publishers and break apart the creative, right? We now have this opportunity, and we know that when we optimize media and creative at the same time, we know that the ROAS or the performance is much better.
Yeah.
We now have the opportunity of bringing those two worlds together. So look at all the creative agencies. You were talking about where, where they're taking money from non-working media, the creative. We just partnered with a company called Cartel AI. We put 2 creative production companies out, same brief, and Cartel AI. They came back in 80% less costs. They did it within a week versus 5 weeks. They didn't send a production crew down to Cartagena to get the filming costs down. Put it in front of the client. Client could tell the difference between the 30-second spot.
But the bulk of the spend that has to happen, and this is where I'm sympathetic.
That was a $2 million spend.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
I'm sympathetic to the point you just made about the marketer who says, yeah, we really don't want to think about the media because it's basically all indifferent. You can optimize it all you want.
It's also complex too.
And it's complex. But I think it's less about the production and more about all the underlying work that goes into it, the consumer insights, the big idea ultimately. And that stuff's not as automatable at all right now.
Well, look, I think we have a pulse on consumer and sentiment and insight on a daily basis now of what your customer's doing. You should be using that data and insight into your creative process.
Right, but I think about to me, still one of the most resonant campaigns. It's now a little old, but like think of the Colin Kaepernick tweet.
Yeah.
Right, from, we all know, I think most of us would know what I'm referencing when, Wine and Candy has like one tweet, right? One idea. We see how the best creative ideas, like most influential things. Yeah, the breakthroughs. Like that is still the most important thing, and that is what I think a lot of brands are fundamentally focusing on.
I actually think the most important thing right now is actually finally personalizing the creative, so that you react differently than I react based on the creative that you get. And I think that's really the breakthrough idea. It's not the one idea anymore.
Fair enough.
And machines
master
can
idea
help you
behind
do
it.
that. Machines can help you do that.
They
now.
can, but there's still a master idea, master consumer
100%.
insight.
No, that'll
master
never go away.
inspiration.
I
Right.
So the Marlboro Man idea will always be the master idea, right?
Yep.
But to how to execute it and automate it, what resonates for me is going to be different.
I'm
than
making the
someone
point
else.
that the Marlboro brand, any of these big iconic ideas, that's a terrible example now, but
That's why I use it.
Exactly.
That's why I
Any of these iconic ideas around brands, a very small number that figure them out, all the difference of the business will come from that. And I think that everything else is optimization. I mean, it's not that it can't be important and impactful, and not that everyone here can't make a lot of money doing it, but it's to say that that is why marketers, like that is the singular most important thing, I think, for most brands.
Yeah. We have time. If there's any questions, anybody have a question for these gentlemen while we have them here? I'm glad we did this.
Me too.
This is good. It's an important topic.
It is.
Well, we're going to revisit this actually because we're doing Advertising Economic Forum.
I think you should have a holding co. Have somebody up there.
We'll have Amy.
Amy. Okay. Bring
No,
Amy
because
in.
we're at Horizon Media on October 6th during Advertising Week.
Oh, she'll come in my house.
We're doing the half-day show, so we will bring
All right,
this
all right, good.
back.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks everyone.